move on to the beginning of life cycle 2, which is during the meeting. So the first thing we're going to discuss is etiquette for remote meetings. So you are all familiar with NEDARC's practice of reviewing meeting norms at the beginning of the meeting. We just did that actually. And virtual and in-person meetings share many etiquette standards, but there are also many that are different. So in this session, we're going to focus on 3 different types of meeting etiquette. The first is going to be general remote meeting etiquette. Second is facilitator etiquette. And then third is participant etiquette. So we're going to begin with general remote meeting etiquette, and this is going to be suggestions for all those involved in a meeting. The very first piece of general meeting etiquette is simple. Regardless of your role, prepare for your meetings beforehand. I think this quote provides some good advice. Logan Green, the CEO of Lyft, says, "I start each day reviewing priorities, prepping for meetings, and getting updated on key projects." Meeting preparation looks different for facilitators and participants, so we will talk about this a bit more in a bit more detail in a couple of minutes. The next suggestion was mentioned by Eddie yesterday in his session on meeting logistics. It's important to dedicate a physical space for your virtual meetings. Virtual meetings often require more discipline than in-person meetings because you aren't in the same room as the other participants. So to help minimize interruptions, whether you're at home or at the office, both the meeting facilitator and meeting participants should prepare a quiet place to attend the meeting. And if you run the risk of getting interrupted during the meeting, it might be a good idea to put up a do not disturb sign. Consider including the time that you'll be available again on the sign. So having a physical space will also help minimize distractions. Some tips for further minimizing distractions include muting the microphone when you're not speaking, leaving your keyboard alone, as keystrokes can be distracting, and avoiding eating, especially if your camera and microphone are turned on. The number 1 distraction during a meeting is email. Not only is it tempting to view your email, but it actively distracts you with its notifications. So you may want to consider including close your email as a meeting norm or ground rule that you talk about at the beginning of your meeting. And this one is directly related to minimizing distractions like email. We should all avoid multitasking. And we all think we're good at it, but in reality, nobody is really all that good at it, especially if the meeting topics being discussed are nuanced or complicated. The next point is to enable your video camera. And there certainly may be times where everyone won't want their cameras, but when possible, it's a nice way to help everyone connect with the others in your meeting. And when you are using your camera, consider the lighting. If your office is really dark, you might just look like a shadow. You might consider getting another light. Along with the lighting, whenever your camera is on, make sure that you are aware of your surroundings. Visually, you want to avoid clutter, beds, and other people. And if you aren't sure about your background, put on a digital background. Most, if not all, virtual meeting platforms will allow you to put on a virtual background. And actually, in the next session, Jane will go over digital virtual backgrounds in more detail and how they can help boost engagement. But I wanted to let you know we have created a couple of virtual backgrounds that you can use if you'd like. And again, those are available on the workshop resources page of the NEDARC website and are called Better Virtual Meetings -EMSC Virtual Background. And this is an example of the 9. And then Andre will drop that link into the chat. And then in addition, sort of a side note, some of these can be used as virtual backgrounds. Well, they could all be used as virtual backgrounds, but there also are some reminders and spots that you could drop an agenda in if you wanted to do use these slides for an agenda slide or for a meeting norms slide, with some rules on there. It's also important to avoid noisy surroundings, but sometimes working from home, it might be impossible to really avoid all that distracting noise in the background. And so there are actually some programs that you can download that will cancel your background noise. And I haven't actually tried any of these yet, But if you're curious, you can go to this slide in your workshop manual and click on the link that's here at the bottom of the computer screen. And it will guide you to a link that has a couple of options of programs that can cancel your background noise. And lastly, even though we all love going to work in our pajamas, it is good meeting etiquette to dress appropriately even for virtual meetings. Not only will other meeting attendees likely see you over the camera, dressing in work-appropriate attire can help you get in the proper frame of mind. An Australian study actually showed that working in pajamas doesn't necessarily hurt productivity, but it can actually be bad for your mental health. So next, we're going to move on and discuss facilitator etiquette. These suggestions are going to be split into 3 different pieces, which the first is before the meeting starts, second is during the meeting, and then third is after the meeting. And they're basically things that you'll want to consider doing when you are the person in charge of the meeting. So Andrea taught us yesterday that an important part of setting a meeting agenda is to assign people to help out. In fact, she said it's probably the single most important thing that you can do to have a successful meeting. And part of that is to assign people to help out. And assigning people is also related to meeting etiquette because it helps you and others avoid multitasking, which is one of the rules that we talked about under general meeting etiquette. And don't forget also that someone can be assigned to more than one role. Those roles, as are mentioned here and as were mentioned by Andrea yesterday, may include somebody to take your notes, somebody to record the attendance, monitor the chat box, to keep the time, and to moderate the meeting. When planning your meeting, you also need to ensure that all the technology that will be needed is ready to go. NEDARC does this for our meetings that require a lot of technology, like our tech talks. And when we were all working at the office, we actually had a list that included our computers, the different cables we would need, microphones, and any other tech that we couldn't forget. And then as Eddie mentioned yesterday in his session, this is an especially important thing if you're planning a hybrid meeting where you will have some virtual and some in-person attendees, because the technology list especially for hybrid meetings can end up being relatively long. So it's something you'll definitely want to make a list of and make sure that you have all the technology and that you know how to use all the technology. As facilitator, you should be the first one in the meeting room. Doing so will allow you to check technology, make sure that everything is working how you expected it to, ensure that your other computer notifications are turned off, like your email or your chat application. You actually might want to consider entering the room from 5 to 30 minutes early, because you can always keep working on other things until people start showing up. And as meeting facilitator, it's very important to start on time. Those are the items that we're going to cover about that need to occur before the meeting ever starts. And during the meeting, there are still things that need to happen. So a pro tip that we have is that if anybody joins the meeting really late, you actually should avoid repeating information and you should carry on with your meeting. Here's another quote. It says, "The annoyance that grows while waiting for the meeting to start spills over into the meeting itself, resulting in more interruptions, fewer ideas, and decreased morale. Crush that crankiness by getting started on time, even if everyone hasn't arrived." And as mentioned just a second ago, avoid the temptation to go back. It may seem like you want to go back and catch people up, but that just ends up encouraging people and telling them that it's okay to be late to the meeting. Rather, try suggesting, if somebody would like to go back, suggest that they go ahead and just take a look at the meeting notes and the action items and decisions that had been made prior to the time that they arrived. So to start out the meeting, once you have started, you'll want to set the stage by reviewing the objective, process, and duration expected. The objective is the goal that you hope to accomplish. The process is how you will get there, and the duration is how long it should take. Setting the stage also helps improve meeting engagement because it allows participants to know what to expect and gets them thinking about what is to come. The next suggestion is to lay down ground rules for norms for your meeting. They'll differ depending on the meeting, but norms can include things like turning on your cameras, muting your phone, closing your emails, and there are no bad ideas. When the time allows, and when the meeting has new people, it's a good idea to introduce everyone. The suggestion obviously would only apply when the meeting is not too large and when it includes external people. For an internal staff meeting, you clearly would not need to introduce everybody. It would be a waste of your meeting time. But it can be very helpful if there are external people whom everyone may not know. As the meeting moves forward, be sure to conduct periodic check-ins with the group to make sure that everyone is on the same page. And also check with the timekeeper to make sure the meeting is on schedule. And the last facilitator suggestions we're going to have pertain to after the meeting. And whether you send out notes yourself or have the note taker send them out, it's critical that everyone get a copy, and that should come ideally no later than the next day. And then finally, as a meeting facilitator, it likely will be your responsibility to follow up on the action items that were assigned out during the meeting. When to follow up will depend on the meeting and the action items. For example, if a meeting is regularly scheduled, such as a staff meeting, you might want to delay follow-up until the beginning of the next meeting. But if there's not another meeting scheduled on the topic, follow-up on action items should still occur. And Mike is going to talk a little bit more about action items and follow-up in a little bit. All right, the last type of etiquette we're going to go over is for virtual meeting participants. So many of the etiquette standards for participants, again, are going to be similar to those for the facilitator. So some of these may look familiar, but they're still important, so we're going to cover them. The first point here is unsurprising. Meeting participants need to arrive to the meeting on time. Now, this allows the facilitator to start on time without having to worry about requests to repeat material. And this is another pro tip. It's as a meeting participant, you still should join the meeting 10 or 15 minutes early and just keep working on other stuff until it starts. I will say in my personal experience, I found that if I decide to wait to join a meeting until right before it starts, and if I don't enter when I get the calendar notification that pops up saying, you know, you've got 10 minutes to the meeting, I usually end up getting lost in what I'm doing and I'm late to the meeting. So even though I know it's coming up, if I don't just get in when I first remember it, I often end up being late because I get lost in my thing. And admittedly, I'm probably more easily distracted than many of you, but this tip has been good for me. As mentioned a minute ago, the meeting facilitator is not the only person who should spend some time preparing for a meeting. Thorough preparation by participants will make the meeting much more effective and efficient. And many trainers actually suggest that you spend at least as much time preparing for a meeting as you'd have time allotted on the agenda. Andrea taught yesterday that oftentimes if you're the facilitator, it can be double the time that the meeting is going to last. If you have an hour-long meeting, you likely will spend 2 hours or more preparing for it. As a participant, you should spend at least as much time, if not more, preparing for the meeting. If you have an update to give or something, you should spend a while presenting or preparing to make sure that you're ready to go. And then during the meeting, the first thing we want to do is make sure that we are clear and concise. This is actually something that I personally can struggle with. I have a tendency to want to tell everything in my brain about a topic, which just ends up confusing people and it ends up taking more time than I have allotted. So failing to be clear and concise can become particularly distracting and confusing during virtual meetings. And this is actually another reason to come prepared, because I know that personally I'm less likely to ramble or less likely to go off on tangents if I come into a meeting well prepared. During a virtual meeting, it's easy to sit back and try to get other participants to forget about you, but to attempt to engage with others is good meeting etiquette. And this can happen by asking questions and offering your opinions on things. whatever the case may be. And in the next session, Jane will go more into depth on how to encourage participant engagement when you're the facilitator. But keep in mind that as a participant, it's also still good etiquette to engage and to be an active participant in the meeting. And then while we are ensuring that we're engaging in the meeting, we still want to avoid interrupting. At a minimum, interruptions can derail someone's thought process, and at worst, it can derail the whole meeting by pushing it off schedule and off agenda. So right now, I want to take just a couple of minutes and step back and think like a meeting facilitator again. Let's think and share some ways that you have handled interruptions in remote meetings. So the goal here is hopefully we can hear a few ideas that others may not have thought of yet about how to handle interruptions during a remote meeting.
Braden, yeah, Anna has raised her hand.
Thank you. Let's go ahead, Anna.
I think it sort of depends on what the interruption is. If it's related to the topic and can be easily answered, I usually try to answer it at that moment. If it's not, I try to set up a time, not necessarily like 11:55, but after the meeting, set up a time with the person that has the interruption to try to. Sorry, I just read Jean's chat note. Now I'm distracted. Try to set up a specific time when I can tend to the interruption if they need an answer, or just say, thank you, I appreciate the input. I'm going to go back to the slides now, or back to my content, or back to the discussion. So I try to acknowledge that there was an interruption and then move forward from it.
Great. I think that's a really good one to acknowledge it. And like you say, if you can answer it quickly, just do it and then move back. If not, to put it as a parking lot item or something that can be discussed after the meeting. Any other thoughts?
Braden, it was shared that muting people on the back end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great one. If interruptions are not intentional, but just because a dog is barking or something, you can always, as a facilitator, you should be able to mute somebody on the back end. One thing I think is when you have an interruption, you can refer back to the agenda or possibly the timeline, that needs to be kept. And that's another one of the reasons why the agenda is so important, is it does provide you an opportunity to, if there's a distracting interruption, you have something that you can point to head back to your meeting and get back on track. Thanks for some of those ideas. And interruptions can be challenging in a meeting, but there are some really nice ways, especially if you've followed some of these suggestions and created meeting norms, and you have a solid agenda and you have somebody keeping time. A lot of those will actually help you be able to handle interruptions as they occur and get back on track. Okay, lastly, now we're moving back into the participant thought, the participant mindset of a couple of things that we want to do after the meeting is over. And the biggest thing is just to get to work. This first consists of reviewing meeting notes and then completing any action items that are assigned to you. So before we close out this session and move on to keeping participants engaged with Jane, I want to do a quick review of this session. So what is one etiquette suggestion that was mentioned during the general remote meeting etiquette section that you hadn't thought of before, or that you remember from that section?
Braden, it was mentioned starting the meeting on time. Another one was wearing clothes.
Wearing clothes is important.
Virtual backgrounds was mentioned. I like going over expectations and review guidelines. Don't wear jammies. Cleaning the desk behind you. Being concise is a good way to respect others' busy schedule.
As a facilitator, what are some things from the facilitator or the participant section that might be different that you hadn't thought of?
Okay, so we have how to react to late people's arrivals to the meeting, showing up very early. Don't backpedal for latecomers. Turn off emails so you don't get embarrassed.
Yeah, that's always nice.
Have that happen. Dressing professionally, brush your hair, how to react to latecomers for sure. Some people are admitting that they're guilty about doing that and backtracking for latecomers.
It's really an easy thing to do. I think the initial, I mean, I can tell you my personal initial reaction when somebody comes in late is to want to catch them up. It's actually something I have to kind of consciously think of, and sometimes I even almost feel bad not going back for them. But like Andrea spoke a little bit about it yesterday, and like was mentioned earlier, it really just kind of encourages people that it's okay to be late. You know, it says, yeah, if I'm 10 minutes late, it doesn't matter, they'll catch me up. But by not going back and just encouraging or suggesting that either they talk after the meeting with whoever they missed, or they just review the decisions and action items that have already been made, it helps them realize, okay, well, I need to be on time or else I'm going to have to figure things out on my own.
Okay, a bunch more comments came in while you're talking, Braden. One is, I forgot about the hair brushing. The next one's from Debbie saying, I'm guilty also, but I think she's referring to the backtracking. There was more comments about brushing hair. And then Anna says, yes, I'm no longer going to backtrack, essentially. And then Mike, I couldn't tell if you were clapping your hands or raising your hands.
I just, to that point of not trying to catch people up, that's it. I mean, it's a really good suggestion, and you'll find that it's probably really hard to not do that, especially if it's your boss or superior who walks in late, because then you'll be thinking, oh, well, I need to catch them up. So recognize that and just try to keep the the same sort of rules for everybody.
Great.
So Amanda Perry has an idea here. She said, for my advisory board meetings, I have, they're coming in fast, sorry. I have a fun activity at the beginning of the meeting. They now know that if they are late, they miss that activity, which they all love. So it encourages them to be on a few minutes early. And then others are asking for if Amanda would share those ideas. And then Amanda also said it's always a poll everywhere competition of useless fun facts. They literally compete from their phones and take pride in winning.
That's kind of fun. Another actually idea that I heard, and it might sound a little passive aggressive, try not obviously ever be passive aggressive, but I've heard a suggestion where people say that they bring some treats and they put the treats away after 5 or 8 minutes, and then if you come in late, you just don't get any treats. So you obviously wouldn't want to like take them away right when they walked in, but if people know treats are only there for the first 5 minutes of the meeting, you better be there on time or else you don't get any. All right. Thanks everybody for all the great participation and all the great ideas. Definitely don't hesitate to reach out to each other if there's somebody that has a good idea that you think you'd like to hear more about. You can reach out to them and see if they're willing to share. Beyond that, there also is available resources, as was mentioned, and these are all links. So if you go to the NEDARC website and go to the workshop manual, you can come to these slides that are in the manual and click on these links to find more information about this stuff, or to find the resources that we used. And lastly, here are the references that were used for this presentation. And now I will go ahead and turn the time back to Jane so that she can tell us about meeting engagement.